to host the sixth edition of How Do I Do X session. I am Vihar. I'm one of the DevRel engineers here at Appsmith. So today I have Pranav and Joseph joining me. So Pranav and Joseph, do you want to quickly share where you're joining from?
Hey, hi folks. My name is Pranav. I'm joining from Pune. I head the community team for Appsmith. So if you have been active on Discord, Discourse, or any other place, you might have interacted with me. So yeah, that's me. Over to you, Joseph.
Hey, I'm Joseph. I'm a developer advocate and connecting from Florida today, Tallahassee.
All right, awesome. So I am joining from Hyderabad. It's in a state called Andhra in India. So yeah, me and Pranav are in the same time zone, but Joseph is joining from US. All right, we'll wait for a couple of minutes till folks join, and we'll get started.
Yeah. Um, Vihar, can you tell us about like what are we building today?
Right. So I'll quickly give you like a brief about how we run the How Do I Do X sessions. So we have support across multiple platforms. We are active on Intercom, we are active on Discord, we are active on a community platform which is posted on Discourse, and we see like a lot of questions, around building internal tools and admin panels on Appsmith. So what we do for these sessions is that we pick some questions which are frequently asked there, and we try to explain them in these sessions so that whenever you are stuck you can just view them, or you can join us live and ask your questions, and you can always come back and watch this video to solve that particular problem that you are working on. So today looking at all the previous looking at the questions that were asked in our community, we are going to discuss about the Select widget and the entire Select widget family on Appsmith. So we'll be mostly discussing about the four widgets we have on the platform, which is the Select widget, the multi-select widget, and we have treeSelect widget, and then we have multi-treeSelect widget. So we'll be deep diving into all these four widgets. We are gonna show you how you can bind data onto Select widgets, how you can have different use cases when you are working with lots and lots of data. We are gonna dive deep into it. But in case if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, or you can always ping them on our community.
Yeah.
All right. Pranav, do you want to add anything to this?
Yes, actually, Select Widget is one of our most used widgets, and I have seen a lot of questions on, hey, how do I like bind data to these widgets? Because there are little caveats when it comes to these widgets. Like, it's not really straightforward. So if you have some duplication in your data, or there are some null or undefined values in your data, then it gets little tricky to figure out like what's going on when that error message pops up. So um, like Joseph has built this immensely, like really cool application, which is gonna blow your mind. So I'm really excited about that. So yeah, let's get going, I guess.
All right. So before we dive in, I'm gonna share you a personal experience, especially with the drop downs or the Select widgets. So the last weekend, I was building a blog of my friends on the Django admin, and then the way Django admin works is that you create your tables on the Django database, and then you can access all the CRUD operations on top of your Django admin. So there, what happened was I have two models, which is my blog, and the other one was categories. So basically every blog is linked to a particular category. So whenever I created a new blog, I had to like create which category it belongs to. For example, it can be like a tutorial, it can be a guide or something, and then you'll have to essentially link those two things. And when you're trying to search for a particular category, it's super hard in Django admin because it doesn't have any search. So what I've done was I've simply connected that Postgres instance onto Appsmith, and then I was able to filter all my blogs within category using the Select widget. So this Select widget basically comes with all the search, all the properties, so it's super easy to use. So essentially, you can build an Django admin alternative, which is like super cool in just like 10 minutes. So that's like my personal experience. But yeah, you are gonna see lots of use cases like this in this demo. So with that being said, let me quickly share my screen and give you a quick demo of how the Select widget on Appsmith works. I hope you guys can see my screen. All right. So this is how the app looks on Appsmith, and on the left you have something called Entity Explorer. This is where you can, view all the widgets. This is where you can view all your queries, and this is also where you can manage your JS object. So this is the place where you can, create a new JS object and, write all your, logic for your internal tool in a JS editor. So on the right, you have something called property pane. This is where you can choose themes. This is where you can also set the responsiveness of the apps. And when you select a widget, you also see a property pane where you can configure all its properties. So now to give you like a quick demo, I have an API here. This API basically fetches some random user data, and this is when you hit the run, this is where you see all the result data. So what
Excuse
I'm
me,
gonna
Vihar. Can
yes,
you zoom in a bit?
yes, I'm gonna do that. Is this fine now?
Yes, that's good. Thank you.
All right, awesome. Now I'm gonna just search for the select widget, and this is where you can see all your drop downs or the select widget. So the way to build it is you just simply drag and drop it onto the canvas. So when it is selected, you see all its properties. So you have the options, which are the list here, and then you have a default value, you have a placeholder, and then you have all the properties to configure your select widget here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try displaying the list of countries from the API on this select widget. So for that, I'm going to use a JS snippet. So you can access JS snippet from this search bar. So I'm going to search for view snippet, and then I'm going to say uh, down. All right, this is the docs. I'm going to say for snippet. Right. So you have a snippet called populating options from a query. So I'm just going to copy this. So this is where you can, bind the data on the select widget. So this is where you can see the expected structure, which is basically a key value pair. Joseph is going to cover more about this, but I'm going to quickly show you how you can bind the data. So I'm going to replace this with an mustache binding. And then here, I'm just going to copy the JS snippet. But then my API here is named as API1. So I'm going to just write the API1. It doesn't work because the JSON here is nested. So what I'm going to do is just for quick debugging purpose, I'm going to bring a text widget. I'm going to make it real large. And then I'm just going to display all the data here. All right. So you have your data on a text widget, and then you see all your data is inside the key called results. So let me access the results there. So I'm gonna just say results, and then there you go. Now my goal is basically to have all the cities listed under this select widget. So I'm gonna go back to select widget, and then here I need to do results dot map. I'm gonna say country. So country dot location dot not only. So it's country dot location dot city. All right. Yes. So we have our label as the country name here, and I'm just gonna also copy the same thing for the value. And just like that, you should be able to see all the countries listed in this drop down. And you can always change the default value here. You can have KILIY. Okay. You can have this country name, and this can be set to here. So this is how you use your select widget on Appsmith. But now Joseph is going to talk more about the data structure, and he's going to explain all about the multi-select widget and how you can configure them. So yeah, over to you, Joseph.
All right. Let me share my screen. Can you guys see this?
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Okay.
Can you zoom in a bit, Joseph?
Yep.
Yeah, I think this should do.
All right. So we're going to go through the select widget, multi-select, treeSelect, and multiTreeSelect. And There's different data structures that are used to generate the lists for each one. If you can select one, it's there's a flat style list for just like a single array for the select and for the multi-tree or for the multi-select. And then when you get to the tree ones, those are nested data. And then it's kind of mixed. You can select one here or one for the tree, and then there's a select many for the the flat array and for the nested. So we're going to go over how to generate those options, how to generate the JSON to feed the default options from an array of strings. We'll do it again with an array of objects, and then how to sort your key value pairs, your array of, you can sort it by the country or by an ID. And then we'll look at how to avoid errors with duplicate values in your data. And then lastly, avoiding errors with any nulls or undefined. So first, we'll go over the data structure for each type. And with select and multi-select, it's just a list. There's no nesting to the data. So you can select many with the multi or a single one here. But in either case, the expected data structure is the same. You're going to feed it a list of key value pairs like this for the label and for the value, and then it's just multiple objects like that in an array. And then with the tree select and multi-tree select, there are these nested options. So you could select the top level, or you could select one of the sub-levels here, or all of them by selecting the parent. And then same with the multi-tree select, it's the same data structure, but you can select more than one. And when it comes to the default values, they're kind of paired up differently. So here at select and multi-select have the same structure that feeds the dropdown, and then tree and multi-tree have a similar data structure. With the default selected values, they're grouped this way. The select and tree select, your default would be a single string. And then with the multi-select and the multi-tree select, if you wanted to set a default value, it needs to be in an array, so in square brackets, even if it's a single value. If you wanted your default for a multi-select or multi-tree select to just be a single value, just put the square brackets around it for an array. So next we're going to look at a couple of use cases here where you generate your dropdowns and you end up getting some errors from the data. And so I've got a couple data sets here, and there's different examples of where the value is missing. Like there's a column for notifications and we're just missing the value. We don't know if they want email or SMS or both. And the property is there, it's just a blank value. And then I've got another data set here where the city, there's not even a property for it. If you look at the object, and I'll show you in a minute in the code, but it's completely missing the property as well, not just the value. And so that'll give you a different type of error. And all three of these they're bound to a function that should be giving us a list, but none of these are working right now. We're going to go through each one and see why they're getting an error and then how to work around that for each type. So for the rest of this, I'm going to switch over to the editor mode. All right, so in this first one, I'm mapping over the table data, and for each row, I just want to return an object that's got a label using the email and the value using the email. And it is working, it's returning that, but the editor is giving me an error because it sees duplicates, and so it doesn't actually render here. If you do this in the JS editor and it's not connected to a widget, you'll just see it all come back and give you the duplicates and everything. So in this case, I'm working around the duplicates just by filtering the ones that have a value here. And if I just take out this comment here, so I generate this section of the objects with the label and the value, and just ignore the fact that some of them could be blank. So this is just one way to solve this issue of the ones that are missing. You could filter it beforehand and then map over all that stuff, or you can map over all of it and then filter it. And just to keep this example simple and easy to kind of show the difference here, you can map over it, ignoring that if it happens to be blank, and then just filter it so that you only get the ones where there is a value for that option. And so at this point, I'm filtering labels and values, right? Like my filter, my condition to pass it is that the option has a value there. Whereas if I was going to filter it up here, I would want to filter on the column notification off of that property. So at this point, yeah.
Can you please zoom in a bit more?
Sure.
Yes,
Okay.
that's clear. Yeah.
Yeah. So so you can see like the first section here would just return an array that's got some null values in there, and then here it will filter out and only return if it actually found a value. And so now all these are good, and this drop down is working now. And so it actually told me the error was duplicates, but all these emails are unique. The duplicate was the nulls or the blank values. And so I think your dropdown could actually have one that's blank, right? But you wouldn't want multiple options like that. So onto the next one here is for duplicates. And this is a simple example of deduplicating an array. So instead of coming from an array of objects, it's just you've got a fixed list of values and you want to deduplicate it. I'm getting the same error here that there are duplicate values, and it doesn't actually render, it doesn't show the output of this. But if I copy, I'm just going to swap it out with this new set. And so I'm going to map over a different array that starts with the same data. But I'm taking this array and expanding a new set in it. So the set command, it's similar to an array, but part of its structure, it enforces that everything in it is unique. And so if you try to add the next one to it that's not a unique one, it just gets ignored, you know. And so it's going to deduplicate that for you. And then I use the spread operator and expand that into a new array and then map over that. So this deduplicates before you map over it. And then it does the same type of map we used before, where you return an object with the label and the value. I'm going to do another example here when we get into the JS object that shows how to deduplicate with an entire object, where maybe you only want to deduplicate from the ID or the name or something that you've got some that are in common and then others that need to be unique. So the last one here is when we have null values, or sorry, undefined. And so in this data set, I've completely left out the city property on some of the data. So you can see like where people are from, and there's no city on this first one. It's not just a null value like notifications, it's the entire property city is missing. And so that'll give you a little bit of a different error as you're parsing through it, but you can handle it the same way. I'm just doing a dot filter, and then I map over everything and try to create the label value pairs. And then some of them just get passed into there without it. And so I'm filtering by the ones that have one. And this approach is, it's a little easier to read and to figure out what you're doing. It's probably not as efficient. Like you could map over it only once and not have to do the second filter if you did a test while you're in the map to see if it has whatever property. So there's lots of ways to approach this, but this is the easiest way to kind of show the difference of, you know, here we've got some repeats, and it's showing that there's duplicate values for the cities in here, and so so this array is no good. And then here's the null ones. So the duplicates are, in this case, are just the empty ones, and then we just filter by the ones that have a value there. So that's just kind of a basic approach to handle the individual errors. And now we're going to look at some other JS functions and ways that we can kind of combine these. So the first thing I've got is an array that's unique, every value in here. And you might want to make a list of drop downs for like all the months or days of the week or something like that. So your input is just an array of strings, but then
Joseph,
you want to get...
you got to zoom in, mate.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
It's fine.
So I've got, at the beginning here, it's not any functions yet, just some sample data. So here's our good array with no duplicates. And then I've got an array that does have some duplicates here. We got 2 Jessies here. So we'll make a drop down from that and show how to deduplicate from an array that has duplicates. And then I've got a array of objects, and there's 2 for C and number 3 here. And they're out of order. So you can see that B is last. So I've got duplicate objects, and we need to sort this to create the drop downs. Okay, so I'm starting with those kind of 3 examples. And so first we'll look at the month options. If we just want to return an array and create like your key value pairs for the labels, that one's really easy. You just map over it and you return the label value. There's nothing to it, right? So then we start running into errors with duplicates. So to deduplicate the array, I'm using new set like we did on the example on the canvas here. I've got one example here that'll show the duplicates, and I've commented out the fix for it. So here it generated the right format, but there's 2 for Jesse here. So I'm just going to comment this out and use this line. And then we see that it's deduplicated it, and it's doing that with the array first. So we're taking this array, creating a new set from it, that deduplicates the array, and then we map over it. So there's no issues. Whereas on the canvas a minute ago, I was generating them first and then filtering out the duplicates. So just a couple different approaches. Now for an array of objects. So here we want the label to be a person's name, but then the value that gets selected from the dropdown is an ID. And there could be duplicates on the name, but the IDs are unique here. So let's look at deduplicating an array. This one first is going to return some duplicates for this example. So like if you wanted to create a dropdown of all your countries, it's easy to just say map over the data and give me back a label and a value for every country, but then you end up with these duplicates and you'll get an error. So to deduplicate an array of objects, it's a little more complex than just an array of strings. And again, there's lots of different ways to do this. What I'm doing is I define an empty object that's like my temp holder, and then for each object in this array, I'm going to set the letter property in here to the number, and I'll end up with an array of A equals 1, B equals 2, whatever. But if it encounters another B or another Norway, it's going to rewrite that property. And so the duplicates, it gets deduplicated because it keeps overriding that same property. By accessing it this way, it'll deduplicate it. So I'm going to return first, just return the temp options. And so it starts out blank, and then for each one, I'm updating that property with that other value. Okay, and so that the duplicate C from up here, it mapped over this set, and it just wrote C equals 3 twice. It came back to that same exact property and rewrote it, right? And so the first step to deduplicating it is that I'm overriding the same one. Let me find, okay. So comment that out. So the next step is if you look at the keys for that object, here's a list of the keys. So now you've got an array that you can map over. And so first I create the object that has all of those properties deduplicated, and then I map over the keys. So here, did I lose my spot here? Sorry, this one. So instead of returning the temp object now, I'm going to, sorry, this one. Return the final thing here. I wanted to show you kind of the steps in between. Okay, so instead of mapping over the source data as it is and creating duplicate versions of this, I deduplicate it in that temp object and then map over that to create that final format that we're looking for. All right.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So in summary, like every option is built from an object which has label and value property, right? And values are the ones which should be unique, is what you're saying, right? So let's say if in your particular case there is an example of duplication with label C and value 3, but
Mhm.
let's say there is another object which has the same label, sorry, which has different label, let's say D, but has same value as 3. uh,
Sure.
then in that particular case the recommendation would be to choose a different value which is unique to that particular label. Is that correct?
Yeah, and the duplication could occur on either side. Your
Huh.
data might have unique values from the column that you want to be the label, but it's got duplicates in the column you want to be the value, or vice versa. The deduplication is going to happen when you try to write to this temp object here, and whatever you have here is what it's going to deduplicate, and whatever's over here, it's the last one that it runs into as it's mapping over. That's the value that you'll end up with.
Okay.
If you wanted, you could structure your temp object backwards and put the number here or the value instead of the label. And so you could deduplicate either way with this method. And then when it's time to map it, just swap out. Or if you're going to take O, which is an object key here, so you would swap those two.
Yeah.
It'd be a pretty easy to adjust. It just depends on your data and what side the duplicate's on, which one you want to be the key and the label. So.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay.
Thanks.
So now we're going to look at sorting an object array. And so I just deduplicated this object array, and I've got A is 1, C is 3, and then B is 2. The duplicate's gone, but it's not sorted. So I'm using Lodash to sort, and I've got a link here for the order by function that we're going to use from Lodash. And this takes 3 parameters. You've got the first parameter is your entire data set, and then the second and third are both arrays. And so you could have multiple fields that you want to sort by, and each one could be ascending or descending. I could say sort by the letter and then sort by the number, or if you've got 4 different columns, you wanted to sort by state and then city and then somebody's last name and then first. And you can do each one a separate parameter. So it would just be comma ascending, comma descending, whatever order that you want. And so with this sort options, I'm taking that same data set, and now B is first. So you can combine all these and make one giant function that takes your array and maps over that and deduplicates it and sorts it. And so there's lots of kind of little pieces here that can all be used to work on a bigger function that does that. And I've got an example here that's, get rid of this. I'm going to go back to the live version to show how this works first. And then we'll see if we have questions, or we can go into the code on this a little more. But I wanted to show how it works first before we get into the details. So this is a snippet that you guys could just copy into a new JS object. And then there's 2 functions. I've got get select options and one for get tree select options. And so you pass it some data and then a key value pair. And so here, if I want to drop down of all the countries and have it deduplicated, and I can tell it take this data, and then for the label and for the value, I want the same thing, the country. So I've got this table filtering off of a dropdown that's generated from that same data. And then when I select the country, it's changing the users that are available over here. And so I'm going to select a couple and then change the country. And you'll see that my multi-select is resetting. So if you had, say you're building an app where you want your user to select like a top level thing, and that filters the next drop down, and maybe they go back and change that first one and it's no longer applicable, it's an invalid entry. So you can set this up to reset based on this first drop down changing. And then I've got a condition in here if you don't want it to reset. So if you want to retain, you pick a couple users from one country and then switch the country, and you don't want it to reset, and then you add a couple more. And this could keep your drop-down list from being massive, if you don't want it nested. So the other approach is that you use the treeSelect, and then it could be a long list, but you're grouping it by certain columns. So here's an approach where you pass it the 3 parameters, and this function will generate your drop-down list, whether they're both the same, like country here, or whether you want different key and value pairs. And then for treeSelect, you need 2 sets of keys and values. So what do you want the top level to be? And then inside of that data, there's a children array, and then it's the same data structure. It's just another set of objects with label and value pairs. And so if I pass this one, these 5 parameters, the data, and then I want country and country here, or an email and an email for the next level, you can bind this to whatever data, pass it the parameters, and it generates that dropdown. And now here's the entire country with all the emails nested in it. And that can be a single select here or a multi-select. So on this side, I can go into each country and select everyone from that country, or just expand each one and select a couple. And so this data is being generated off of those 5 parameters with country and country for the first level, and then name and ID. So we're going to share this so that you guys can just copy the code from here and use this with your own data. I've written it to be reusable to where you can just plug in whatever parameters you want and then generate from that label and that ID. I think we should see if there's any questions first, because this is a little more in depth, that it kind of combines a bunch of those properties that I showed earlier.
Yeah, I think what Joseph just showed, right? That's a code snippet that you guys can just plug from this particular application and put it in yours, and it'll generate like list of options and labels for you for any kind of select widget that is available on Appsmith, right? We should also like take this into the snippets that we have going in the whole product. I think it would be really beneficial for people from that perspective. So
Yeah.
Actually, let's see if there are questions right now. No, I don't see any regarding this. But we can come back to your implementation of how you did it, because it's fascinating to see
Cool.
in action. All right. So let me share my screen and show you end-to-end application of how this can be used. The zoom levels are good, right?
I think you can, zoom in a bit, maybe 1 point. Yeah.
Okay, nice. So it's a common practice to have like a lot of data when you interact with any sort of dashboard or admin panel, and it's really messy when you want to go through each of the properties and whatever data there is, right? And you want to get to that granular level of filtering so that you can figure out, hey, is whatever filters that I'm putting on this particular data, does this data set have the data points that I'm interested in? So this is just toy data that I picked from one of the services. It's a Olympics data till 2016, and it lists all the categories of the sports, all the events, all the people who participated, their team, the year, and if they have won a medal or not. So this is pretty detailed. So let's go to edit mode and see what we can do here, right? So I've taken 3 different type of filters over here. One is what kind of season it was, right? So Olympics is played in 2 different seasons. One is summer Olympic, one is winter Olympic, and there are different kinds of sports categories that you can participate in, right? And generally it's 2 years gap in between these seasons. So summer season I've selected over here, you can see that there is a gap of 4 years. And if I go to winter, it will update the list, and now you can see there is also a gap of 4 in between. But let's say in 16 it happened, so 16 it was summer Olympics, so in 14 it might have been the winter Olympics, and that's how it works. And as you can see, the sports categories also are different for both the seasons. So let's implement this, right? And as you can see, depending upon which year do I select, this data is then fetched, and I can go ahead and see like whatever sport that I want to, and figure out if the event that I'm interested in is listed or not. So let's go to the code and let's see. So let's start really simple. Okay, this is the simple query that I've written. Let me just so this is the simple query that I've written to extract all the players from the data set. Now what we want to do is we want to figure out if, and here's the data. So what we want to do is we want to figure out if we can add a filter of different seasons, right? So the condition that we need to add in this query is basically where clause from SQL, and which will say, hey, if so where the season is, say, summer, equal to summer, or season could be equal to winter. And what I did for that is also create another query. I wanted to figure out how many different seasons are available in this data set, and I fetched those by just grouping over the seasons, and this would give me unique number of seasons. So the raw data is something like this. This is a list of objects, whereas there is only one property called season. So let's go back and let's take a look at this. So as Joseph explained, the options are built on top of an object which has one label property and another property is value, and the value should be unique. So in this particular case, we only had two options, which is summer and winter, and that's why when we go over that data and say that, hey, label and values are going to be the same, it generates a unique list for us with unique set of values for each of the option, and that's why we don't have any errors over here. You can also see the expected structure that is there, and it also shows how it should be, right? So once we have this filter over here, what we want to do is we want to then, every time we change this drop down, we also want to change the data accordingly. So what we will do is we'll basically fetch the query that is being used to populate this data. I'll go into this implementation a little later at the end, but just for the context, every time we change this drop down, we also have to run a query which is going to fetch the updated data based on this particular filter. The next drop down that I have is regarding the years, and this is exactly the same. I can go to fetch years, and as you can see, I'm just going to figure out what kind of season I'm talking about. Is it a summer season? Is it a winter season? And that's my basic condition over here. So again, I'll group by over the years, and if I just mute this prepared statement for a second, you can see that the evaluated value as of now for the selected value over filter which we just created, the season filter, is winter. If I do this again and run, you'll see that there is data, and we can go back and change this to, say, summer, and you can see that the default value changes and all the options that are available also change. This is happening because we have this map over here. Again, it's really simple because we have grouped by over the year property, we are getting unique values, and the default value is being set to the latest year, whatever that is in the list of the data we are getting for years. And similarly, when we change the year, we also want to, so let's go back to 2004, right? So as you can see, like, we are getting the data latest from um, whatever the filters that we have chosen. We have chosen Summer Olympics, we have chosen 2004 filter, so it's showing us that. If you notice a bit more, there is another drop down, and it shows it's for the category of sports, and it's also showing archery. So how did I manage to do that, right? So it's a third thing that we have integrated with the table. Let's go here and let me show you this example real quick. So what we're going to do is, now we have year filter, so we want to figure out how many events were, what were the events that were conducted in that particular year. So every year in Summer Olympics there are almost 30 to 35 different types of sport that are played, and over like 300 types of categories are there for each event, right? Sorry, there are 300 events that are played across those 35 different sports. So this is how the list is. So there are sports, and then there are events in those particular sports. But now, as you can see, even though there are 301 records, i want to have a I want to have a filter which filters by sport. And blatantly, we can see over here is there is a lot of duplicates, right? Just athletics, if I'm not wrong, is has like 40 different events. So it will be duplicated over 40 times, and similar with boxing or some other sport as well. So we want to get the unique sport out of it as well. So Joseph explained how you can do that. There was a word which was repeated again and again, which is set. So there are two kind of data structures for um, having a list of things in JavaScript. Right? One is array and other is set. So the difference between the two is, in array you can have duplicate elements, right? So let's say you have an array of, say, weeks, right? So sorry, that's a bad example. Let's say array of months, right? So now you can have month going from Jan to December, but you can also have some more entries in there which repeat over that entire array. Say Jan is mentioned like 3 different times, so that's a duplication of twice, right, for that one particular option. But sets are really unique in a sense that each element can exist only once, right? Which is then beneficial for us, because if we have an array which has duplicates, what we can do is we can convert it to set. So now every element is going to exist only once, and you can transform that back to an array. Now the resultant array that we get is going to have unique values in it, and now it's just a matter of mapping over it and creating the label and value pair for our options. And that's exactly what I'm doing over here. So Joseph explained one of the syntaxes, which is the spread operator, and this is another syntax for generating the array. So arrays have this dot from function with it, where you can pass the set that we have. So right now, if I just, okay, so let's do one thing. Let's just remove this set thing once and for all, and then we can come back to it, you know, after we have, okay. So there is sport. Let me see if I'm missing something. So there is one more. Let's create this. So there we go, and there we go again. And what we want here is we want this I dot was it sport, I think. Yes, and we can remove this last thing. Actually, brackets, right? So we have this. Okay, so this is it, right? So now what we did is basically we got all the sports that are listed from our query, and now we are just going to do dot map over it, say I. And what I want to do is I want to create a label and value object out of it. So label is also going to be I, and value is going to be I as well. And if you take a look at this, this again will show you the duplicates, and it's the same exact error that Joseph showed you, right? So now, as I mentioned, what we can do here is we can pick this up. We can say, hey, what I want to do is I want to have a unique array in this bracket over here, which is going to be array dot from. As I mentioned, we can create an array out of a set, but how do we do set? So it's just new set, and we pass the array with number of duplicates. And if you see right now, because we have used set, all the entries that are here are unique. There are no duplication for archery or athletics, and our options are filled over here, right? So now let's get this whole dashboard working, right? So let's just a second, I'll manage this a bit more. I'll zoom out a bit. Okay. So there is dependency between every filter that we have. So the year filter depends on which season it is, and the sport filter depends on which year it is, right? So when we fire or when we change the option in the filter of sports filter, what we want to do is we just want to change the data in the table, right? So that's why we are using the run function for the particular query which fetches the data for this table. But for here, we want to change two different things. One is the option in sports filter as well as the data, right? So let's check out how I've mapped it, right? So dependency is year, sorry, this data depends on sport as well as year, and sport depends on year, right? So what we want to do is first we want to figure out what sort of sports were played, what were the categories, and second is we want to fetch the data. So that's what we are going to do. First we are going to fetch all the events, and on success of that query we are going to fetch all the results. uh, for seasons filter, it's three level of nesting, right? With seasons we want to change the year, we want to change the sport, and we also want to change the data for the table, right? So let's go to its on option change property. So this says we have a query manager JavaScript object, and there it is, right? So every time we are going to change the option for seasons, what's going to happen is this is a fetch years. So years will be updated first. We are going to fetch all the years, and then we are going to change the type of events played, and then we are going to at the end fetch the data for that particular table. And let's look at the final thing is how have I integrated all three filters with the data that we are getting. So it's really simple. It's just that you have to add a where clause and figure out the options that you are setting um, in your filters or in your drop downs. That's it. And this is really just a template for us to be used across. Like, it doesn't really matter what type of drop down you're using. If you're using, let's say, a multi-select which gives you an output of an array, right? it gives you multiple options that you have selected. So you can use something like that in this particular query and it would still work. So yeah, that's about it for this particular application. This will be available once we finish with the session. This will be available publicly, so you can go ahead and figure out, mix and match all these things. This data is also available for use, so you can again build more on top of this. Because if I go over here and if I remove this and just place star over here, there are a lot of properties that are available. um, and this is fairly large data set. There are entries from 1896, if I'm not wrong. So you can play around and figure out how this thing works. So yeah, that's it from my side.
That was awesome, Pranav. Thanks for
Thank you.
covering most of the use cases that developers can do on the Select widget. All right, folks. So in case if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. We have a question that's related to the table widget, which we'll be taking. But in case if you have any queries related to the Select widget in particular, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we would be happy to answer them.
Yeah, and like this was the particular use case around select widgets that we observed that people are struggling with, and that's why we came up with this particular event and with this topic. So if you are wondering, hey, how is this XYZ widget or XYZ data source that I'm not comfortable with and I'm struggling a lot, what we can do is on Discord we can just create a thread and talk about it over there. And maybe next time, if we get enough interest from our community, we can pick that topic and show all the different use cases that are possible with XYZ widget or the data source of your choice. So yeah, please feel free to join our Discord and have a chat over there with either me, Amelia, Jimmy, and all the other people who are available. So yeah.
And I'm thinking maybe we can run a quick poll around our community
Yeah.
channels to see what we can discuss for the next How Do I Do X session.
Yeah.
I think that could be a great place to start.
Yeah. Actually, let's just take that question and we can go into the code that Joseph has prepared. It's really nice. We'll just go over one snippet because it's complicated, but yeah. So this is the question you're talking about, right? The Okay. So we just released inline editing for the table widget. If you guys aren't aware of it, and it's really awesome that you can do that. Okay, but the whole widget is in let's say its initial phases, and over the period of time there are already discussions going on in internally regarding, hey, what are the options that we can add. You can already use buttons. I think you can already use menus, but I'm not sure there. Even I have to check that, but yeah. um,
But I'm also interested in knowing the use case
okay.
on how the Select widget can be helpful in a table.
Obviously, like, so whatever we're doing over here is filtering. But let's say you have a CRUD application, and it's really simple from there to, let's say, a field like what is the gender of XYZ person, right? It's a quick task to change that, or it's a quick task to change the country of wherever, like whatever entry that you have in your data set, right? So it's fair ask, I would say. But yeah, uh, and again, I'm not able to give you the hard deadline on when it will be available. But if you have the requirement, please reach out to us on Discord, or even go to the GitHub where you see that this issue is open, and have a discussion over there. Our PMs are available to discuss it with you, and yeah, we'll be happy to figure that out. So it's a non-answer answer, but yeah, that's the best I can do, I guess, at this point.
Right. I think this month we have awesome, new features that are already out. So make sure you are registered or signed up for the next event where Confidence, our YouTube star, will be doing a quick demo of all the features that we have shipped last month. And this also has some information on how you can use the table widget version 2. This session we'll be doing it on next Thursday, but feel free to hop on in onto our Discord and ask questions in case if you want to like quickly test it out. But yeah, you are going to see like a quick demo of that on next week.
Actually, let's go to Joseph's example now. Yeah. Hey, Joseph, can you share your screen and show us the code?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So I'll go over this example first. If we have time, maybe we'll do the treeSelect one as well. But I want to show how this one was written. So you can pass it data and then a key for the label and the key for the value. It's going to look through your data and find those two different properties and then pull the value from there to build this new dropdown. So let's look at the code for this one.
Can you zoom in a bit?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's pretty short. The first one with just the 3 parameters, and I've got some defaults defined here. So if you're running this and don't actually have any values, that's what define the parameter, and then I'm putting in a default here. So the first thing is that I create a array that does have duplicates in it. My dupe values array is just to map over the data and return taking this label name. In this case, I'm using the name and the ID, but I take the label key and then for that row, find that property row.label key. And so take that data and it's dynamically looking to each parameter. So you figure out what's the second, or actually the third parameter here. And it goes to the row and then finds that value key. So I'm building a array of objects that does have duplicates in it, and then define the output as an empty object. And for each one of those, for the output called a property called option.label. So this is my array of options. Find the property that's got the label, whatever the label was up here. And so it goes to output.name and it writes that value to whatever the property was here. And then again, I'm using the object, I'm using getOwn property names, but you can also use like object.keys just to generate an array to map over. So these are the properties that are in the object. And now that I've got a list of those properties, I can map over them and get the keys out of this deduplicated output here. And so for this one, it's just the 3 parameters, your data and a label and a value, but it's dynamic that you can reuse this snippet multiple times on different data sets and just change 2 words there and get a different dropdown out of it. And then for the treeSelect option one, there's a second set of label and value keys. And it starts out the same way, but I add in the child array, but it's empty at first. So I just put I put it there as a placeholder, generate the array of objects that just has the label and value for the top level, and then an empty child array. And then for each, go over the duplicated data again and push that value. Where is for each one, I'm pushing a new array of the second, like the nested level of key value pairs. So, so there's 2 for each loops there. And the second one creates the child array that gets pushed into the empty array that was put here as a placeholder. And then again, you just take the keys. So the output properties right here, I'm taking the list of properties and just mapping over them so that for each key once it outputs that combination of the output property there. And so with those 2 functions, you can create the data that's the data structure that's needed for all 4 types that we have. Now, those are pretty complex already. Like compared to just the simple map where you do the label key value and your data is perfect and there's nothing to worry about. This adds the kind of complexity that makes it dynamic, so it's reusable. But what I have not done in these two is check every single value for nulls or undefines or the missing properties and all that. But we've got all the pieces here, in the error handling that I showed on the first tab. So you can combine all these, and this would get really complex if you wanted to account for everything, every possibility of a null in the key or the value, and then sort the data. So it's not a all-in-one that does everything, but all the pieces are in here, and you can basically put that together the best way that applies for your data. If you don't have any nulls or undefines in your data, then there's no reason to have all those extra steps in the code. But all the pieces needed to do that are there, so you can combine those as needed from these snippets.
Okay, so that means that as long as you have an array with objects, you can use the function that you have put together and it'll generate the options, right? It's just that if there are null values or undefined values, you have to plug in the extra functions, the strategy that you showed, wherein you can filter out those options.
Yeah,
and
the easiest way is just to generate it with the duplicates and then do a dot filter where row dot label, and that's it. You don't even have to say equals whatever, because if it's not there, it's false. If it is there, it's true, right? So you just filter it by row dot label or row dot value, and so that's a lot easier to do. But if you want to filter it as you're mapping and do it all in one shot, it's probably better for performance, especially if you're mapping over a large data set. But keep in mind, if you're working with a database, it's way better to do that group by query, like you guys were showing, like I think in both of your examples there. It's going to do that deduplication on the server side. Your request gives you back a deduplicated list already, and then you can just map over it with the label value pair, and there's no extra stuff you have to do to duplicate it. If you're working with an API and it returns duplicates, then you have to do that. But any database where you can do a group by or some kind of summary thing and not get back the entire data set, that's just going to save you a step. You don't have to mess with the extra complexity to deduplicate in JavaScript, and the data that you map over is going to be a lot shorter. So I would definitely recommend using the method that Pranav showed with any database, and then for APIs, filter it after the fact, unless you want to make it fancy and filter it on the fly as you're going through each one. I tried that, and it was putting it still returned null in the array, right? If you're doing a map, it's going to return something and put in a spot in the array. So even though it didn't output label equals blank and then value equals blank, it still outputted an empty object, and I still had to filter it afterwards, right? So I think there's probably a way to do it all at once, if you're worried that much about performance, but I found it easier just to build it and then filter it after.
Yeah.
Right. This actually reminds me of the mistake I have done in the last session. So the chart widget also takes in the same data structure. And while I was binding the data with duplicates, the chart widget doesn't work. So I think, you can use the same function whenever there is, a key value pair of data structure. You can use either, the techniques that you guys have showed. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, folks. So we'll wait for a couple of minutes for questions, and we'll try to answer them. Else, we'll be ending the session. So I'm gonna leave you with a task, everyone. We are just 105 stars away from hitting 20K on GitHub. So in case if you haven't, starred our repository, feel free to give us a star. And yeah, we will try doing something for our 20,000 stars. We will try to celebrate that, but let's see where that goes.
Yeah. A little caveat there. In like just this year in January, we had reached 10,000K. All right, and in just 7 months, we've doubled that. So that's like really cool. Where we're going with the whole community. it's pretty inspiring. So yeah, that's it.
And to be honest, we haven't done anything to get the stars, and it was all the love from the community, which is
Yeah.
like super awesome. So yeah, looking forward to that 20K GitHub star
Yeah.
celebration. All right, folks, we'll be ending this session. Also, feel free to sign up for our next one. Conference will be talking about all the new features that we have shipped in this month, July. So this will be on the next Thursday. Uh, for starters, the entire session might be a lot. So we are gonna leave you with the forkable apps. Feel free to fork them on your workspaces and play. Try playing them around. Or else, in case if you have any questions, feel free to hop onto our Discord and ping us on the support channel.
Yeah.
All right, folks. We'll be ending this session. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks a lot, guys. Bye.
Guys.